Okay, everyone. So today we are thrilled to welcome Caitlin Redding to our show, known for her touching and no holds barred performances. Caitlin's repertoire spans from Purcell to Tchaikovsky. A Juilliard alumna, she has captivated audiences with roles like Carmen and Mimi in La Boheme on stages across America and Europe. Caitlin is also passionate about new works and interdisciplinary performances, often collaborating with her husband, pianist, and double basses. How do you pronounce that? Joan? Juan
Joanne. Yeah,
Cantaloupes?
yeah, Joanne. Perfect.
Joan
Yes.
Cantaloupes. Recently, she has focused on experimental and contemporary music, performing with groups like the New Juilliard Ensemble and Phoenix, and at venues such as Carnegie Hall and the Berliner Festspielhaus. I think
That's your house. Yeah, yeah,
I
it's a
should know
mouthful.
because I know a little bit of German.
Mhm.
Um, Also, Kaylin interprets the title roles in Carmen and La Cenerentola, as well as Charlotte Werther, Mimi Le Bohème, Orfeo ed Eurydice,
Beautiful. Yeah.
Dorbella Cosi fan tutti, which I know,
Mhm.
Rosina, ooh, Il Barbiere di Seviglia,
Uh-huh.
and componist Ariadne of Nexus, among others. I'm so glad I speak English. Another thing about Caitlin is that she's an advocate for disability, and it says here that you
Mhm.
have Erb's palsy
You
of the
do.
right arm and shoulder.
Yes.
Okay. Representation in the arts. So she is advocate for disability representation in the arts, and she's dedicated to creating inclusive spaces and opportunities for physically disabled artists. She also innovates with trapeze dance productions. I'm looking forward to that. And circus operas. Wow. Pushing the boundaries of performance art. She's also fluent in multiple languages, not just English, but German, Italian, Spanish, Catalan, and French. Um, Also, you hold a Master's of Music degree from the Juilliard School and Bachelor's degree from the University of Maryland.
Hmm.
And you currently split your time between Barcelona and Berlin. Welcome to
Correct.
the show, Caitlin. We're so glad
Thank
to have you.
you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. It's very
So
nice to
happy
meet you.
to.
It's such a pleasant speaking to you, and I love your smile. You're making me smile
Oh,
more.
thank you.
I'm gonna be going to work and going, hi guys.
Good, great. Spreading joy.
So what inspired you to pursue a career in opera and classical music?
Ooh, well, I've been singing my entire life. I started probably when I was about 4 or 5 in church. My parents like to tell this story about how I told my mom that I was going to go sing. We were sitting in church and she was like, no, 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 like sit down. And I said, no, I'm going to sing now. And I walked up to the front of the church and I sang. And that was pretty much it. I started badgering my parents for music lessons. And when I was younger, I really wanted to do musical theater. I was absolutely in love with musicals like Annie, Wicked, basically anything on Broadway. But some people told me pretty young that I didn't really have the voice for musical theater. So, how about you try classical music? And that for me stuck. And I've kind of crossed genres a lot into more musical theater style, sometimes a bit of crossover jazz sort of singing, but everything for me is always based in classical technique, and I always end up back in opera somehow. It keeps drawing me back every single time. So yeah, it was kind of one and done for me when I was little.
I want to ask, that's yes, Gravity, Wicked. That's
Yes.
my favorite song. I've heard it
Oh,
so many times,
yeah.
and it's the ending of the song which goes like to a crescendo to the top, and it's
Hmm.
like, whoa, it's like one.
Yeah, it's so intense.
It's one of the most better songs from the actual play. I love it.
Yeah.
Um, so. Did your studies at the Juilliard School shape your approach to your performances?
Um, I would say from Juilliard, I learned a lot about resilience. It's a very intense place. In a way, it's not so much a school as a bit of a young artist program, at least for the vocalists. It's really trying to, for the master's students and the artist diploma students, it's really trying to push you out to be ready to be on large stages. And so I would say the education that I got is not what I expected coming in. But in the end, it really did push me to think about who I was as an artist, what I valued, who I wanted to be, um, who I brought into my sphere in terms of influences, teachers, coaches, because that's also such a huge part of being an artist is having the right team behind you, and finding that as a young adult is incredibly difficult. And so I had some really wonderful people there who shaped me, guided me, led me to other wonderful people. And yeah, that shaped me in a way, I guess, that I didn't expect. I went in expecting it to feel like a school, and it felt a lot more like the push to professional work.
May I ask if your Erb's palsy, your right arm and shoulder, did that affect how you grew up? How it affect your interaction
Um,
with other kids and adults and people?
a bit. I really wanted to do gymnastics when I was a 3-year old, and it wasn't really possible. So I got into dance instead. That was a big one. In terms of things like bullying and being treated differently,
Hmm.
yeah, I definitely experienced some of that. I think honestly, in the same way that most of us who are part of some kind of other group experience it in a bit. I wouldn't say it was excessive. For me, it really impacted me later on, once I started my professional career on stage,
Hmm.
because Erb's palsy is, it's a bit of a funny thing if yours isn't severe, which I had surgery, partially corrective surgery when I was 14.
Wow.
So mine is not nearly as severe as it was. And also, initially, in terms of severity, my parents did a lot to give me increased mobility as a baby and as a child. And that made a huge difference for me later on in terms of what my arm and shoulder were capable of. So it turns into this sort of thing where if you're not aware of exactly what it is, or you're not aware that I have a physical disability, I've had a lot of people look at me on stage and say, you look weird, or you look uncomfortable, or
Mm.
you're doing something strange with the side of your body. And then having to combat that in a way that feels right for me in terms of not making everything that I do artistically about my disability, because it's not, but also being a good representative of who I am as a disabled woman, as a disabled artist. Um, Putting that in my bio was a really big thing for me, because for years and years I tried to hide it, and I would just kind of hold my arm tight to my side, keep my shoulder down, and a lot of people didn't notice. And that's also fine. Some people notice more than others, and that never bothers me. But now I am in a place as an adult where I'm trying to be more aware of what disability representation on stage can do for the people who come after me. And that's super important, because I don't see many disabled opera singers, and I didn't grow up seeing lots of disabled people on stage. And so that's something that I would like to see change in the future.
I've seen many disabled artists and musicians, performers in wheelchairs. I've seen drummers and guitars playing with their feet. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen people in wheelchairs scuba diving. They can do anything. I don't know if people look down on you
Yeah,
and say,
absolutely.
because your
Yeah.
arms and legs don't work, you can't do anything. You have blind singers, we know who they
Mhm.
are,
Of
like
course.
Stevie Wonder and Andre Bocelli. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
just part of you that's happening, and but you can still
Mhm.
live your life. I've seen it,
Absolutely.
and you don't go, "Hey, is there anything I can do for you?" Like look down on this street. I'm like, "Hey, how's it going, buddy?" Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Absolutely.
that's amazing, and I love the ability that you said that you innovate trapeze dance productions and circus operas. How do you do that? How do you go about doing that?
Well, as a disabled, I guess, disabled circus artist, disabled aerialist, there are a lot of things that there are some things that I just can't do that
Mhm,
physically I'm not capable of doing and will never be able to do. And that's totally fine. That doesn't bother me. And anybody that I've ever worked with, I've been really lucky in that the people that I've worked with in the circus world have been
mhm,
incredibly kind, incredibly understanding, and really innovative and wanting to help me adapt things in a way that it's going to work for me and it's going to make sense in my body. And
mhm,
then there are a lot of skills that I can do. They just require a bit of a workaround. And I have a strong background in dance. I started dance when I was 3 years old and danced for about 20 years. And so I have a good sense of how to make things happen in a slightly different way. It usually just takes a bit of patience from the people I'm working with. And so I'm very lucky to have a lot of colleagues who are very patient, are very interested in finding those workarounds with me. And when I do come across people professionally who aren't so interested in taking that time, I tend to just not work in those spaces because life is short and I want to make art in ways that allow me to fulfill my full potential and allow me to use my body in the way that feels right for me. And I'm lucky to have found a lot of that.
and what's the most awkward situation you've been in that sort of like, "Oh boy, I wish I didn't have this?"
I did have a director one time tell me I looked like a monkey.
Oh,
Um,
ouch.
and it was tough because it's somebody that I do really still respect. And he wasn't aware that I had a disability. And it was just, we were staging something very quickly. It was an awkward situation. And he was getting frustrated that things weren't looking the way he wanted. And he just goes, you can't do this. We were doing something that involved the arms hanging straight. My right arm does
Mhm.
not hang straight, and he screamed from the back of the theater, "You look like a monkey!" And
Oh
I
my
was
goodness.
like, not the best day, not the best day for me. Yeah, and then I've had it likened to something that's going to cause legal problems for people wanting me to do something that I then said I couldn't do and offered an alternative. And they said, well, I guess we have to do it this way because if we try and make you do it the other way, we'll have legal problems. That was also very awkward and weird. But, we all have our moments in life, especially in the theater world. A lot of emotions tend to run high. People tend to be very emotional. And I find
Mhm,
for me, the easiest way to navigate those situations is to just keep a bit of a wall up with certain people and kind of protect myself emotionally because, a big part of being on stage is bearing your soul to people, allowing yourself to be seen, and to be able to do that without being afraid of how people are going to perceive my disability. um, I really have to do a lot of management in terms of boundaries and what situations I allow to happen, what situations I put myself into. That's a lot of work that I can do on my own to already mitigate these sort of things.
how did you, figure out what your vocal range was, though?
Yeah,
You could have been a mezzo, you could have been a mezzo-soprano, you could have been an
yeah,
alto,
yeah.
overture, or soprano.
Well,
Ho, 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 ho.
right now, I sing a bit of everything. I sing what? Yeah, in Spain right now. Yesterday I just sang Tosca, which is a bit of a higher soprano role, and
Yeah, wow,
then 2 months ago I was singing Orfeo, which is basically an alto role. So I do a bit all over the board, which
amazing.
yeah, it's tough, but it makes me really happy because first of all, I'm of the opinion that it keeps me very vocally healthy. I never go too far in one direction, but also it's just such a wide range of characters,
Mhm,
styles, kinds of music. But I was lucky to have a very, very good technician in Berlin who, about 4 years ago, I started working with her, and she basically redid my technique. She taught me from a very anatomical standpoint how things are working,
Hmm.
how to optimally move from the top to the bottom, how to give myself access to a lot of different styles, a lot of different ranges, a lot of different effects without really putting myself into a box vocally. So, my opinion is always if someone asks me to do something and I have the notes for it and I can sing it at home and it works and it's something I want to do, I say yes.
But when you're doing the acrobats, you're singing at the same time. Like I
Yeah.
know, like Britney Spears, Madonna, knows that go on stage, and Beyonce, and they're
Uh-huh.
doing the performing and dancing. They have to sing at the same time.
Yeah.
How does that work for you? Because you'll be doing all these acrobats. You go,
Uh-huh.
ah, ah,
Yeah.
I can't do
Well,
this anymore. Ah.
I have to say, there have been some moments I had a performance in Australia in February, and there were some moments where I was doing some kind of tough, twisty things, and I would ask the technicians, in this moment, can you please turn my mic off? Because I know I'm probably going to give a to kind of get into a position, and I don't really want the audience to hear that. So that's a lot of management as well. But yeah, so when you're singing on trapeze is basically a trapeze that hangs on one point and it spins if you want it to. But also sometimes if you don't want it to, it's going to spin anyway. So you're
Yeah.
usually spinning around. And so you need a mic because otherwise you're going to get the Doppler effect if you're singing
Mm.
the woo, woo, woo sort of
Uh-huh.
thing.
Hmm.
For me, I luckily started powerlifting maybe 7 or 8 years ago,
Mm.
and having a really solid core helps a lot with that because it gives me something to kind of ground me when I'm spinning in the air. Also, my least favorite type of exercise, cardio, is really helpful because the more you can kind of keep that very solid,
Hmm.
calm stream of air while the rest of your body is going crazy, the less the vocal production is going to be disturbed. So you're going to get less sort of hitches in the sound when you're doing really intense tricks. So for me, it's a lot of maintenance exercise, a lot of trapeze training, obviously, to
Hmm.
work on new tricks, to figure out what kind of positions I can sing in, what kind of positions look great, but I absolutely cannot sing in them. And then a lot of maintenance work like lifting. Occasionally I can be convinced to run, but I hate running. But other types of cardio, Pilates, it's a lot of maintenance stuff just to make sure I'm always in a base shape of being able to do lots of cardio
Hmm.
activity and still keep my breath stream really, really calm and relaxed to be able to sing.
You're so inspirational. That's fantastic. What challenges have you faced as a physically disabled artist, and how have you overcome them?
It's a good question. I think people expect physical disability. When you say I'm physically disabled, people have a certain expectation of what that looks like. And what I've seen a lot is that if I go into a space, people don't know I'm disabled, and then they find out later. Some people have a hard time adapting to that reality of my body because they haven't perceived me initially as disabled. And we do tend to put people with visible disabilities in a box. And to me, that's very normal. It's a very human thing to do. You know, we're used to walking down the street and seeing people with two symmetrical arms. And so the second we don't see that and we pick up on it, our brain
Mhm.
categorizes that. And to me, that's completely normal. We're used to seeing symmetry and we notice when we don't see symmetry. And so sometimes people whose brains haven't picked up on that asymmetry when they've
Mhm.
seen me, suddenly when I do bring that into the conversation in terms of them wanting something particular and me not being able to deliver, or in terms of me needing certain accommodations. I have worked with people who have found that a bit tough to acclimate to because they don't put me in that box of
Mhm.
you have a physical disability because I'm not in a wheelchair, because I'm not missing a limb, because it's not something that's incredibly obvious to everyone. And on the flip side, there are also people who notice it first thing and are very resistant to put a physically disabled performer in the position of singing something like Carmen, which
Hmm.
is a very, sexually free, empowered,
Exactly.
um,
Hmm.
some for some people, physical perfection is how they would describe her. That sort of character. Not everyone wants to see a disabled body playing that character, and
Hmm.
so for me, it's all about finding people who are open minded, people who want to create something that feels real. Because there, I think I read it. I hope I'm not misquoting this. I think I read a statistic recently that said something like 30% of the people in the world identify as being disabled. That's a huge number. That's a third of the world that has
Hmm.
some kind of disability, be it physical, be it mental, whatever it is. Disability is a very present thing in our lives. It's also the only type of othered community that you can join at any point in your life. If you have a car accident, if you have a bad fall, if you have a medical emergency, anyone at any time could join the physically disabled community.
Hmm.
And so
Definitely.
yeah, it's such a real part of life. And it's something that I think is really important to also put in performance. If we want performance to be about real life, then we need to include all kinds of people. There needs to be representation. There need to be disabled performers playing roles about disability and not able-bodied performers playing roles about disability.
Yes, I
Yeah.
agree with you. I've mentioned that to many on my platform. Also, actresses who one of them's. I asked if you had to play a blind character, would you? And she said, no, I would rather give it to someone who's actually an actor but is also blind.
Right.
Yeah, but what if your character that became blind during the performance is okay? Then I'll do it. Um, or wheelchair actors get someone
Mhm.
who's in a wheelchair. But if you end
Yeah.
up in a wheelchair, then yeah, sure, play the character.
Yeah.
And also just the way that they treat you as well. I remember when I did sufficient damage to my foot at one point. I was limping and crutches,
Hmm.
and people were nice to me and said, "Let me open the door for you," and treating me. But as soon as it got better and I could walk perfectly, people just ignored you because you weren't
Mm-hmm.
disabled anymore. So stuff like that, people look down on you, people treat you differently, or you're at a table with someone who's got um, autism or someone who like speaks as a really like cerebral palsy or something, they always say, "So what would he like? Oh, what would she like to order?" Ask them, like
Yeah. I mean, it's a very it's a very tough thing because so many people do want to be helpful and
Mhm.
they're doing what they perceive to be helpful actions.
Yeah.
They're trying to accommodate in a way that feels right, and they don't understand that just because they think it's accommodating, they think it's helpful, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what that person wants or needs. And
Mhm.
that's where a lot of resistance comes when you tell people, hey, that's actually not how I like to be spoken to. That's not how I
Mhm.
like this referred to. A lot of people do get defensive about that because in their mind they're coming from a place of, oh, but I'm trying to be kind, oh, but I'm trying to help. And the most helpful thing is to listen and take in how people, like for me, how I want my disability to be spoken about, how I want to be treated, what kind of
Mhm.
accommodations I need. I want to be able to tell you that instead of you assuming you know what I need, assuming you know how I want things to be spoken
Mhm.
about, and kind of overriding my wants and needs with you're trying to be helpful. So, yeah.
Exactly. How do you prepare for the diverse range of roles you perform, from Carmen to Orfeo?
Mhm. Ooh, vocally, I do a lot of work to get myself into the tessitura. For instance, when I sang Tosca, this weekend, I basically worked the last month on keeping things vocally very forward, very bright, because that's for me how I access the top of my voice.
Hmm.
When I'm doing something like Carmen or Orfeo, which is a lot lower, especially Orfeo is extremely, extremely low, very earthy feeling. I do a lot more work from with the middle and the bottom, making sure everything is seamless, that everything is very connected. There's never any weird registration shifts. There doesn't sound like there's a hole in the voice anywhere.
Hmm.
So I do a lot of, I guess, vocal study to get myself into the tessitura. And then from there, in terms of the role, I tend to approach things very physically. I think because a big part of my work is also very physical. So I like to think about how the character moves, how they stand, how they
Hmm.
speak to people, how they have big emotions, and that tends to be my way in. Um, is really thinking about the physicality and thinking, if I were this character and I were feeling this thing that I'm feeling in the opera, how would I move? How would I have that conversation? What would I do with my hands? How would
Hmm.
my posture be? And that helps me kind of open the door into new people, new scores, new characters.
Yes, definitely. But what draws you to both traditional and contemporary repertoires?
Oh, I have to say, my heart is in contemporary music, new opera, new songs, things that people are writing today, because there's something in creation, there's something in people hearing something for the first time,
Hmm.
in creating something from the ground up that just feels magical. Because there is no tradition attached to it. There is no expectation of how it's going to sound, how I'm going to move on stage, how I'm going to use my voice. And that for me is just the best work in the world. And so if I have to choose, I'll always choose contemporary. But at the same time, it's hard to pass up opportunities to sing things like Carmen, Orfeo, Rosina, Mimi, things that
Hmm.
are iconic, that have been sung by generations of absolutely amazing artists that do have this really beautiful tradition attached, that it's an honor to kind of incorporate into your own work. And so I do feel really lucky in my work that I don't tend to have to choose, at least for right now. I do a nice mix of both, because after I have too much of the traditional side, I tend to get a little frustrated. And then also with the creation, sometimes I do just want to sink back into a nice Puccini opera or Carmen or something that feels very, very traditional. So it's always a bit of a balancing act, but it's one that
Yeah,
I enjoy.
it is quite a balancing act, and then you have to deal with your mental health. How do you deal with that so you don't become insane,
Yeah.
angry, upset?
Yeah. I have quite a big separation between my work life and my personal life. That's very helpful for me. When I'm at work, I'm completely at work. I don't tend to really get involved in personal stuff. I have some close friendships with other artists, other singers, but my best friends are, for the most part, I think I have one singer who's a close friend, and my other best friends, for the most part, are non musicians. And having that wall, having that separation is a really, really helpful for me, because
Mhm.
I leave my personal life at the door when I'm rehearsing, when I'm singing, when I'm at work. And then the second I leave that, I shut the door on anything, any emotions that I've picked
Mm,
up throughout that process of working on a character. I kind of put those in their box, I put those away, I go home to my husband and just enjoy normal life.
exactly. Yeah, that's good. But how would you describe your experience working with modern female composers in the classical music world?
Hmm. I think it's something that's really important, because you look at, historically, you look at the biggest pieces, and they're kind of all written by men. And there is a big push now for especially older pieces written by composers in a time when women weren't really allowed to attach their names to compositions, or if they did
Uh-huh.
attach their names to a
Hmm.
composition, it wouldn't be published. There is a big push for those now to be performed more. But there's a beauty in working with female composers who are writing now, because they, at least the female composers I've worked with, are just so passionate about what they do. And they're so passionate about using their voice
Hmm.
in an incredibly skillful and technical way. The women I've worked with have just been so, so incredibly good at composing. They've all had their own voice as well, which is really beautiful. There's no feeling that it's coming from anywhere else. It's just purely them, and that's something that's really beautiful, because it just feels like this kind of joint creation that happens, and it's something that I enjoy every time I get to work with a composer, especially with other women.
Yeah, you're talking about there's about some operas or actually were written for men, and there's Turandot that have that one Nessun Dorma. That's actually the
Mhm.
part that the male sings, but I've heard some
Mhm.
female artists sing it pretty well. Like Lucy Kay, for instance, sang a good
Uh-huh.
rendition of
Yeah.
Nessun Dorma,
I think Aretha
and
Franklin did as well.
Yeah, and Renee Fleming, I
Uh-huh.
think, but
Mhm.
I maybe not, but maybe. But also, you must realize that back in the Shakespearean times, women weren't even allowed on the stage. So
Yeah,
these women were men dressed up as women.
right.
So Juliet was a man dressed up in,
Mhm.
yeah. But
Yeah.
now you can allow women to perform, and I've seen a lot of great performances by both genders on the stage, and it's
Mhm.
amazing just what people put into them.
Mhm.
Um, how would you approach creating interdisciplinary performances with other artists?
Ooh, for me, it has to be something, if I'm creating, it has to be something I'm really passionate about.
Hmm.
The other important thing is finding a good team, finding whomever you're working with, whether for me, whether it's a pianist, other singers, acrobats, it's about finding people who are at their core collaborative,
Hmm.
who want to make something with the other people on stage and don't just want to go on stage and kind of do their own work and make it about them or focus on only what they're doing. It has to be about collaboration. And so I definitely have a really, really strong group of people that I collaborate with now. And I'm always kind of on the hunt through Instagram or seeing people in performances for other people that I watch and I see, wow, your energy is amazing. And I would really love to, reach out and work with this person. So for me, that's kind of the basis of it, being passionate about whatever the subject matter is, and then having a team that I feel is just going to go to the ends of the earth to create something together.
When you have to work with another artist, and you can't because there's a
Mhm.
conflict or friction there, do you think
Mhm.
it's because of my disability, or is it because we got to work together? Like, how do
Mm.
you know what the main reason is that you can't work with them? Or do you get a chance? Do you actually try to work with everyone no matter what?
Well, if I'm contracted for a job, then I have to work with the person regardless. And so, yeah, there have definitely been scenarios where I've come into something and your energy just doesn't really match with someone, or you feel that, okay, this person is not really opening up to me on stage. And for me, I don't tend to take it very personally. With anything involving the performing arts, there's a lot, there can be so much insecurity for every artist, for me included, about that thing of being seen, about allowing yourself to sing in a very free way that allows you to be heard without feeling like, oh my God, people are going to judge me,
Hmm.
or allowing you to go on stage and get on trapeze or start doing acrobatics without being worried about, oh my God, people are watching me, I don't want to give too much. It's that very human reaction of, I'm being observed, I have to shut down. And as performers, we have to sort of break through that and give everything and let ourselves be observed anyway. And so I think for me, when I start to feel that from a person, unless they tell me it's about me, which I haven't had that happen yet, I tend to not take it too personally, because we all bring so much on stage with us.
Hmm.
Even if we try not to, we're bringing our own insecurities. We're bringing things that have happened this month, this year, things that have happened this morning. We're all bringing some element of that on stage. And the
Hmm.
goal is to be able to leave that off the stage and be able to open up, be able to be free. But that's also not always possible. It's not possible for every person, it's not possible in every scenario.
Hmm.
And so, normally, when I feel that sort of energy disconnect with another person, I think, okay, we're probably not going to get there, at least this time. And I'm just going to do my best to give you as much as I can. And like gratefully accept what you'll give me. And that to me feels like the best way of handling it, because usually contracts or productions aren't so long. You might be around people for a week, you might be
Hmm.
around those people for a month,
Hmm.
maximum 2 months, and then you move on. And so, if you let it get to you, I think it can really, really build up into a very toxic thing, versus saying, you're coming in with this, I'm coming in with that. We do what we can. We'll be as open as we can with each other. If you're not willing to be open with me, I accept that. And I will gracefully accept all you're willing to give me without pressuring you for more.
Is your husband okay with you working with other men? He's not that jealous
No,
type.
he's also a musician. He's an orchestra musician. He plays the
Good.
double bass, and he's also a pianist. And I'm very lucky in that he understands the demands of being a performer. He understands the
Good.
demands of being a musician, of being on stage. Whenever I do have any kind of onstage intimacy with someone else, I do talk to him about it because it's important to me that he feels comfortable. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's important to me that if he were to come to a performance, he's not going to be surprised by something. And I found that us having open communication about that has made it a non-issue. And if there were ever something he was uncomfortable with, of course, that is for us in our relationship. That's a limit, that a boundary that I would not cross over because performing will end one day, but my marriage I would like to last forever. So, yeah, that is very important to me, but it's something that we have very open communication on, and so
Yeah.
it's never been an issue.
Yeah, that's what makes a good relationship. Communication, open communication, you got it. What was it like to perform in world premieres such as Xavier Paget Corella's The Northwest Passage?
Oh, yes. So Xavier is a Catalan composer, and I was put in touch with him through an orchestral director here in Catalonia because we moved here 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, and I wanted to get in touch with composers in the area. I wanted to kind of get into the contemporary music scene here, and so he sent me some of his pieces that he had written. They were really, really incredibly beautiful, and I asked. Would you write something for me? And I sent him some pieces of poetry by Robert Louis Stevenson that I really love that were from A Child's Garden of Verses. And I asked him if he could create a sort of adult set of lullabies. So verses from this children's book, these lullabies, but set in a more mature way, set in a slightly darker way. And he created this absolutely beautiful trilogy, this cycle of songs called the Northwest Passage.
Mm.
And I put on a concert last February in a recording studio here and recorded those with a very good pianist friend from New York. And it was amazing because we got to go through the process of working with Xavier on the pieces. And there's so much when you're creating something from a new score, there's so much that's not written in the score. And that's where in things like traditional opera, all of these traditions come in of, oh, the singers started doing this 50 years ago and now we do this, or oh, the first time it was performed the singer
Mhm.
did this and the composer liked it and so now everyone does it. And it's the same with contemporary music, that the first time you sing something you realize just how dry a musical score is because the magic that comes out of it is something that's totally created by the artists. And within all of those almost mathematical kind of, that mathematical bit of rhythm, especially really complex rhythms in contemporary music, the atonality music that doesn't sound like Disney, doesn't sound like Puccini, is a bit harder on the ear,
Mhm.
then that's our responsibility to take that and make something that draws people in just as much as Disney music, just as much as Puccini. And I really, really enjoyed that work with him because he's also such a wonderfully flexible person in that he writes his piece. He brings it. He brought it to my house. We worked on it, and it was so fluid. It was such a fluid creation in terms of things changing here and there. In terms of okay, this is the rhythm that's set down on the page, but I'm trying to create this effect. And so, in the end, of course, defer to the rhythm, but the effect we want to create is this. And that's to me what makes the magic. Because if you simply read what's on the score, you're going to come away with something that's very correct. And maybe it's very beautiful as well.
Mhm.
But the magic is in reading between the lines of the music and seeing what the effect was that the composer wanted, or if the composer is alive, being able to ask them that, which is always easier, and then finding ways to create that together. That for me is a magical thing, to sing something and have people come up and say, oh wow, that was really different, but I loved it, because that's how I mean, that's how things like Rite of Spring, so much Stravinsky, which in the beginning people would listen to and go, "Oh my God, what is this?" And then now they're iconic, they're classics, and it's because the people who performed them in those early years took the time to read between the lines and create the magic out of the score instead of simply making what was on the page.
Yeah, talk about magic. Tell us about your collaboration with your husband Juan Cantaloupe and your voice and piano duo. How did that work?
Yeah, so we met each other almost 6 years ago in Magdeburg,
Mhm.
Germany. He was doing a temporary contract as a bassist, a double bassist in the orchestra, and I was singing in a contemporary opera as a guest artist. And we met each other, we started dating, and at one point he said, "Oh, and by the way, I play piano." And of course, anytime a singer hears I play piano, there's a part of our brain that goes, "Ah, okay." Hmm. So we actually didn't do much together those first few years, especially because COVID happened. Everything shut down, and there were months where we couldn't work. And so there were probably about 6 months where we did a little bit, but we didn't make a whole lot of music. We took a lot of long walks. We cooked a lot. It wasn't a lot of music happening, but we got a piano in our house. And then, kind of in the second year of the COVID
Hmm.
fever dream, what it felt like, I started singing a lot of new operatic repertoire. I was working a lot with my technician teacher in Berlin, and he started accompanying me during those lessons because he also thought, okay, well, I have time. Why not add a new skill,
Hmm.
playing with singers and instrumentalists? And it kind of snowballed from there. Then we did some concerts in the US. We played a lot together in Germany. We came here and we slowly kind of built on that and started doing more concerts together. And it's really fun because he has less experience in terms of being sort of an accompanist. He did his training in solo piano, but in the last few years, he's learned an insane amount of repertoire. He prepares all my roles with me now, and he also coaches me a lot on Spanish repertoire that I sing, which is very useful to have at home.
Hmm.
So it's really wonderful. It's a wonderful collaboration. It's an acquired skill, I think, for most people to work with your partner because there, again, especially for me, there is that line between personal and professional, and um, keeping the professionality in that work for me is always super important. And so when we're working together, there is that element of, okay, we love each other, we're married, but that's going on the shelf for a second while we prepare this concert that we have to give that people are paying to see. So it turns into a bit of professional time, and then we have our hour long practice, and then we go back to normal. But
It's
yeah.
amazing. So, and you're fluent in German, Italian, Spanish, Catalan, and French. What language do you like to perform in most?
Oof. I like to perform in German. I think because I lived for 6 years in Germany, and my German was very comfortable. I would teach in German, teach music in German. Um, it got to a point where my German was extremely comfortable, and so it's still a language that I feel like has so much beauty in it, and you can create so much just out of speaking and singing the language. And so that's still a language I like to use a lot. French as well. I would say my Italian and French, since I don't use them as much, are more work proficient now. If you ask me to have a philosophical conversation in Italian or French, it would be a bit more complicated than the others. But I love singing in French. It tends to fit my voice well and the way I think of my technique. I
Hmm.
think French kind of pulls a lot of artistry out of me that the other languages don't necessarily bring. So yeah, those are my two favorite to sing in.
Yeah. What do you think is the most challenging role to date and why?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, Probably Orfeo, which I did. in September for the first time. It's funny. I remember one of my first auditions in Europe was for Orfeo 8 years ago. And at the time, my technique was not what it was today. I was also, I mean, I was 23, I think. I was just young. And I remember them saying that, it was a great audition, but we're worried about the low notes
Hmm.
because it's a very, very low roll. And I was asked to do it this summer. I did it. It was a wonderful production. I got to work some circus in as well, which for me was really gratifying because I like to combine those things as much as I can. So I worked in some kind of floor acrobatics to it as well and got to choreograph a few sequences. Um, but with it being a very low roll, which is probably the least comfortable part of my voice for me, the kind of extreme low tessitura, and the fact that it was early music. Gluck is a composer that I haven't sung much of. I don't sing much early music in terms of things like Bach and Handel, all of those kind of more historical styles. That's never really been my thing, and I've done some of it, but I tend to shy away from it a bit just because it's not a style I'm particularly comfortable with. And so for me, singing Orfeo was a lot about taking that style, respecting the historical traditions, respecting what the composer put on the page, but also putting myself into it and my own style of artistry, my own way of singing, way of speaking, way of creating. And so it was definitely not the most historically accurate and traditional Orfeo that anyone has ever seen in their life. But to me, it felt incredibly raw. It felt so sincere, so authentic. And I do strive for that in everything I sing. I always strive for sincerity, authenticity, something that feels
Hmm.
real, so that I never feel like I'm putting something on and trying to sell it to people. But this for me, um, I think maybe also because of the fact that it was early music and there's just less to hold on to in early music. Things are a bit more sparse. The texture is a lot thinner than it is in more romantic styles. And as much as I have struggled with that style, I feel that in this case it gave me space to create, to bring something of myself into the music. And in the end, I left those performances very sweaty, exhausted, but very happy. And so it was incredibly difficult, but it was also so rewarding. Yeah.
Authenticity is very important to put yourself into the role and to make people believe that you're the character regardless, right? Not just some
Mhm.
actress or some performer doing this. You want to be the part. So it's like, wow, they're actually born for this part, stuff like. What was your inspiration behind your solo act on Dance Trapeze featuring operatic areas and electronic music?
That's something that I'm is still in creation, so I'm still working on that. Um, but for me, the driving force behind that is the idea that traditional opera is really beautiful, traditional music, classical music is really beautiful, but it's undeniable that electronic music is becoming a bigger part of the world. It's becoming a bigger part of what we do. Even in opera, a lot of times now, in classical music, there's an incredible amount of electronics being built into things, electronic sounds, sound loops, the things that can change the sound of your voice. And so for me, I'm starting to play around with that a little bit. I don't have a lot of technical expertise, but it's something that I'm working on learning and incorporating into an act to make something that appeals to the very, very large group of people who love electronic music. Because I also think there's a huge space there for classical music incorporation. And that's something that younger generations would be drawn into with the use of electronic music. And that widens the audience base for classical music as well. And so just kind of putting feelers out into those slightly different and newer sort of genres to me is important also for widening our base as classical musicians to get more people listening to classical music and to also help it evolve because The traditions are beautiful. Mozart, Puccini, Verdi, Handel, Bach will always be there, and they're amazing. But also, everything needs to evolve. Everything needs to change. Change is kind of the spice of life, and that's something that I think is super important for classical music as well. That we allow that to happen, and we don't cling on too tightly to things the way things were 300 years ago.
Yeah, how do you select the contemporary works you choose to perform? How do you go about, I'll do this, I'll do this. No,
Mhm.
this is difficult for me. No, this is a challenge. How do you do
Yeah.
that?
Well, I used to have the very bad habit. When I say used to, I mean as recently as last year. I used to have the very bad habit of when I would program a concert, picking all pieces that were incredibly difficult. And then I would rehearse said concert and get halfway through rehearsing and think, huh, this was not my best choice. And so now I have learned my lesson. I am growing, and now I tend to be very text driven these days. And so that's usually the first place I go when looking at a piece is what is the text, no matter what the language is. And most of the programs that I put together or perform have some kind of theme, and so it has to fit within that theme. But yeah, the text for me is in a way it can make or break a piece because
Mhm.
if I don't believe in what I'm saying, then that search for authenticity, for sincerity becomes that much harder. And so in some pieces, it's incredibly easy. You read some libretti, you read some pieces of poetry, and they just touch your heart. They kind of get right to the core of you. And then there are other things that, depending on your personality, depending on your life experiences, don't do that. And so for me, it's about finding the way in to those pieces and then also programming the pieces that for me do feel incredibly touching, incredibly important, kind of finding that
Mhm.
balance.
Well, that's amazing. That's inspirational. Yeah. I don't know if, depending how I would choose is, well, what's easy on the, especially if you're doing Italian opera.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you got to get the phonetics right. And what if there's Italian people in the audience, or what if there's German people in the audience, or French
Mhm.
people say, "Wow,
Yeah.
that's terrible French." Like, I don't want to, stuff like that. So, um,
Yeah.
can you share your experience of performing at iconic venues like Carnegie Hall and Alice Tully
Mhm.
Hall?
Yeah, so those the Alice Tilly Hall performance was while I was in Juilliard, and I sang a George Crumb, one of his River of Life songbooks, for George Crumb, which was very cool. He's kind of an iconic composer in the modern classical music world, and he wrote this piece for percussion ensemble. There were two songbooks for percussion ensemble and sopranos, and so I sang one, and another Juilliard singer sang the other. They were, for the most part, popular music and hymn settings with percussion, and they were absolutely gorgeous. The funny part of that experience was I went in for the dress rehearsal, I sang the dress rehearsal, and he comes up to me mid rehearsal and he says, "You're singing a wrong note." And I was mortified because to have the composer come up to you while you're reading the music with the music in front of you and say, "You're singing a wrong note," is just like, I wanted to crawl under one of the drums and die. It turned out I had an edition of the score that had the wrong note, and so it was
Oh
okay.
no.
But in that moment, and it was an easy fix. It wasn't a tough thing. But in that moment, I thought, well, I guess I just need to give up now. I guess I just need to
No,
leave.
you sang the wrong note and you look like a monkey.
Exactly. Yeah. But that was a really beautiful experience because I grew up singing in church. I grew up singing all of those songs, and so to be able to perform those in Alice Tully Hall, which was an absolutely beautiful venue, beautiful acoustic with amazing percussion ensemble at Juilliard. That was really special, and especially for it being contemporary music, something that is very close to my heart. And my Carnegie Hall debut was the same. It was also contemporary music. We did do a Pergolesi. Um, this is really terrible because it's Pergolesi now. I can't remember the name. Stabat Mater, I think. I remember the contemporary piece. There was a quartet of us, and then I sang the John Rutter Requiem, which is an absolutely gorgeous soprano solo with orchestra and choir, and that was really magical as well. That was a really beautiful experience, and both of those are definitely made all the better because they were contemporary music for me. So it was, again, this feeling of being able to sing something that people probably were hearing for the first time. And that's something I really enjoy in performance.
Yeah. What role does disability advocacy play in your career and performances? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So for me, I think this is sort of built in because so much of my life, my disability kind of went unacknowledged, and it was something that I did try to hide. It's still, I would say, it's not a big part of what I put on stage in terms of what my artistry is about. I am slowly starting to make more art that's about disability, but in general, when I'm on stage, disability is not at the forefront. That's not what I'm trying to convey. It's not what I'm trying to put out. For me, I am just very passionate about not hiding it anymore because it is, in a way, it's a bit of a privilege to be able to mask and be able to hide. Not for everyone that sees me, but for a lot of people, I can hide it and I can hold my arm in a way. I once had a director who saw that I had a disability and asked me to put my whole arm behind my back like this for the entire opera, and I did. And
Oh,
yeah, so I mean, it absolutely can be hidden. It's a little drastic, but it can be hidden. And so for me, sorry, I'm hitting my desk here. Um, there's a sort of, I guess, radical freedom, or for me, it feels radical in showing up and not hiding it anymore. And in dancing as Carmen, doing circus in Orfeo, being a comic character in Barber of Seville, without doing anything at all to hide my disability or to mask the fact that my arm looks different. And a lot of times I do have people come up and ask me after a show about my disability or about my arm or about my body. And as long as those questions are respectful, I'm always happy to answer them because I think it's so incredibly important for people to see disabled performers on stage doing roles and performances that aren't only centered around disability. And if disability centered art is what you do, that's also beautiful and amazing because that's also super important. But equally as important is traditional art about,
hmm.
traditional operas, all of these things with disabled characters singing title roles, singing important roles without hiding their disability and without it being the driving force behind their character, because it's not the driving force behind me for anything in my everyday life. Honestly, on a day-to-day basis, I don't really think about my disability. I don't think about my arm much. Maybe sometimes if I'm trying to put a sweater on, my arm might get stuck, but that's about the extent of it. It's not something that hinders me in my day to day life. It's not something that I'm thinking about. And so I think I reflect that as well in my art. Like, this is me, this is who I am, this is my body, but the art I'm here to create is about something else. A disabled person just happens to be inhabiting this character, and there
Yeah,
shouldn't be anything strange about that.
and having to put your arm behind your back and perform
Mhm.
like that, like how would you approach self choreographing acrobatic sequences for your performances if you also have your arm behind your back?
I don't think I would be able to. um, that's something that the arm behind the back show, that was a while ago, and that's something that honestly, if I were to be in that same situation again today, I would say no, because it was an easy solution for that director to take my disability out of the equation because it was
Mm,
inconveniencing her. And at I mean, at the time I was younger. I was very concerned with people thinking I was easy to work with, thinking that, oh, she's so great, we want to rehire her. And this is a big issue for young artists, is we're taught to be people pleasers. We're taught to be so easy to work with. And of course, nobody wants to work around a diva. No one wants to work around someone
mhm,
who's incredibly difficult. But it's also important not to let people steamroll over your wants and needs as an artist, even though you're young, just so you
mhm.
seem easy to work with. And so that's something that if that happened again today, I would absolutely say that's not going to happen. This is my body. This is how it works. I can offer you workarounds. I can offer you different solutions. If you want something with the right arm that's not possible, may I
Hmm.
offer you a left arm? I have one of those as well. um, but yeah, for me, I look back on a lot of experiences and I think, wow, if I had that experience today, I would approach it completely differently. But it's a learning process. It's something that I try and be bold about now so that the artists who come after me don't have to deal with people like that. They don't have to be told that their disability needs to be hidden.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, what was it like, your experience? Can you describe when you were with the Berlin-based acrobatic collective, A
Mhm.
Movement of Humans? What was that
Yeah.
like for you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. They're a fantastic group of people. So I was actually substituting for the woman who taught me trapeze, who's an absolutely amazing artist. She's working with Cirque du Soleil at the moment. She's just ridiculously talented. And she had created this show with this collective of acrobats. And she went to perform with Cirque du Soleil. I worked with one of the other acrobats in Australia, and he said, "Hey, we need somebody to substitute for her while she's away. How would you feel about coming and being in the show?" And it's funny. It was my first. It was my first show that was not centered around singing or music. It was movement. It was acting. It was. I did sing still a bit, but that was not the main focus. And it was such an incredible time. They're an amazing group of people. I'm actually going to create another show with them this coming year that I'm really excited about in Berlin. Um, but it's just a really special group of people, and I've made some absolutely amazing friends through that I feel really, really lucky to have. And watching them performing with them is such an inspiration because they're just so incredible. They're so talented. They're so gracious on stage.
Hmm.
That was a blast. It was most of the summer. We did some tours through festivals in Belgium, Germany, and there are more to come this next year as well. And yeah, it was a really incredible experience. I had a lot of fun. I laughed a lot. We did a
I
lot of
bet you,
very silly stuff.
I bet you had a great time. So,
Mhm.
how do you continue to grow and evolve as an artist?
Well, that's a good question. I think um, each role brings me something new, even if it's the same role. For instance, Carmen is something I've sung since I was 23 years old. And so it's something I come back to at least twice a year now. And it changes every single time. It's such a complex character. Most opera characters are just incredibly complex because they're people. And I find new things with her each time I sing her because I've grown as a person. And so, for instance, my last Carmen was in September, and I won't be doing another one at this point until June.
Mm.
And it's it's time that I enjoy the kind of space between because I grow so much, and then when I come back to it, it's a completely different character, and I find myself approaching the arias in different ways, approaching the interactions with the other singers in different ways. I find that so much has changed, and so it's kind of the nature of the job, I think. New characters bring out new things in you, and then when you revisit an old character, suddenly it's kind of like you're seeing the world in technicolor. Everything is so different. If you've aged a year, 2 years, 3 years, if you've aged 5 years, it's like singing a whole new opera. So that's a big part of even traditional opera, but creation as well. It's all about exploring. It's all about asking questions, being curious, being open. That for me is the most important part. Is I never want to stop being curious. I never want to stop being open to new things, to new ideas, to new people, because that for me, that's what keeps me growing. That's what keeps me changing and evolving.
That's interesting you say that. Okay. So, what would you say? Like, what advice would you give to young artists with disabilities aspiring
Mhm.
to a career in the performing arts? What is the one thing that you would say to them, whether they're in wheelchairs, they cerebral palsy, they got anything? What kind of advice would you give to them?
I guess I would say find what speaks to your heart and go after that. Because I can't speak for every performing arts discipline, but for opera, there is such a big push to specialize, to put yourself in a specific box. And not all of us fit in those boxes. Those of us with disabilities, especially, don't fit in those boxes. And so you have to go after what speaks to you and do it in the way that feels right to you without trying to put yourself
Hmm.
into a space that's not meant for you. Because I tried that for a long time and it doesn't work, and people see it, you feel it as an artist. And the second you change direction and
Hmm.
you're true to yourself and your abilities, your body, your mind, the world opens up, and it's a whole different career. It's a whole different way of being. And that's when it starts to feel like, wow, this career is really special. And I can't imagine doing anything else. And I feel so incredibly privileged to be able to do this. That's where that feeling comes from for me, is because I get to chase after what makes me me. Everything I believe in, everything I'm passionate about, everything that I value at the core of my being. That's what I'm chasing after every day with every new project.
Wow, that's amazing. You're so inspirational. I'm so happy that you were actually on our platform. I had a chance to speak to you because I've learned so much from you,
Thank you.
and the main thing is that we're all the same, no matter what physical appearance you have. You're still the same. You got the brain, you got the intelligence, you can just the performing talent. Anybody can do that, and just and that's great. Yeah, I love it. But thank you so much, Caitlin, for
Thank
sharing your
you.
insights and experiences with us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. And to everyone out there, thank you for tuning in. And we hope you enjoyed today's episode and found it inspiring as I did. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much,
Thank
Caitlin.
you. Thank you so
You've
much
been
for inviting me. It was such a pleasure to talk to you today.
oh, yeah, you're very welcome. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to maybe sometime next year. Next year we'll do another podcast and talk about what you've
Amazing.
been up to, and that'd be awesome.
That's
Really
amazing.
inspiration, really inspiration, really inspirational. Sorry, it's take a break. It's 6:10 in the morning here, uh, but no, really, thank you so much, and
Thank
just your
you.
answers was inspiring. I just loved hearing from you. So, okay, everyone, we're going to end this stream, and thank you, Caitlin, for continue to give to the performance world, the soprano world, the opera world. That's excellent. Really love it.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of the day.
You too. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
And everything goes back to its starting place.